Colfax also runs the REACH program. So this program is brought to us as well as our Preparing to Child, which is culinary hospitality outreach wellness, accommodating advocates for the mental health of our create. So we thank them so much for helping support this program in the next year. And then we pass the mic over. Also, thank you to Ace for hosting this morning. And if you haven't already, please check out the fresh pages in the back and pick it up in every week.
Thank you so very much. Good morning, everyone. Morning. Come on. Good morning. Happy Pride. That's right. I may come to you a little bit later. Thank you for having me. Happy Pride Month from the tail end of the month. We're around all year long, though. We celebrate in June, but we're around all year round. So I'm just excited to be with you. My name is Johnny Humphrey. My pronouns are he and his, and I'm the Director of Inclusivity Services at the Center on Colfax. And I'll tell you a bit about our organization in just a moment, but I'm delighted to be with you. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to share this information with you. Okay, so I am, as I mentioned, the Director of Inclusivity Services at the Center on Colfax. I lead a program called Range Consulting, which gives me the opportunity to work with organizations in the business, nonprofit, government sectors. We use the acronym ID, so standing for inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility, and strategies, specifically with an emphasis, but not exclusively, on the LGBTQ+, so lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, that you can stand for queer questioning, plus indicating there are many additional parts of our community that may not be represented within the acronym, but we know that we are a very diverse community. I serve on a variety of committees, and I'm a puppy parent, so I wanted to show a picture of my puppy Ada, who is affectionately nicknamed Ada Tornado. She's got a lot of energy. It keeps me on my toes. I've been doing this work for over a decade, closer to 15 years. I'm a part of the LGBTQ+ community, so it's really a passion project of mine to get to share this information with you. I've been in Colorado for 6 years in October. Prior to that, I lived in Dallas, Texas, where I worked with another LGBTQ+ center and providing these types of services there as well. So enough about me. I invite you we've got a small group here, and then for those that are online, if you'd be willing to put in the chat, I invite you to maybe share your name, maybe what role you have within your respective organization, and if you feel comfortable enough, I invite you to share your pronouns. So a few examples may include he and his, maybe she, her, hers, perhaps they and theirs, or there are neo-pronouns, other pronouns that folks can use, or maybe combinations of these. So mine are he and his, and so if we go, I'm going to just to go around the room. If you would like to share, you don't have to share your pronouns if you don't want to. It's always an invitation, never a requirement. But maybe we'll start right here.
Cheers.
Online, so comfortable if you want to just put it in the chat, you are invited to do that as well. Sharing pronouns and inviting others to do the same helps build welcoming environments, really for everyone, but most certainly for transgender, gender expansive folks. We make a lot of assumptions about people based on their outward appearance. We might be spot on, or we could be absolutely wrong. Certainly, we make assumptions just based on clothing, mannerisms, facial hair, makeup, all of these criteria and many more. But folks oftentimes get misinterpreted, misunderstood, and misgendered. And so people assigning the wrong pronouns for folks oftentimes. And so it's always a good idea when you're meeting someone, in addition to sharing your name, maybe disclosing your pronouns. And it can be as formal as hi. My name is Humphrey. My pronouns are he and his. I'd love to know your name and what pronouns you go by. Or it can be as informal as hi, I'm Johnny, I go by he, him, tell me about yourself. But you start with your own pronouns first. I've been out of school for a really long time, so if you say pronouns, nouns, adjectives, blah, 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 you're like, what? What are you talking about? But by using them, demonstrating what you mean, or explaining in place of your name, what may I use to refer to you by? And obviously, if we're talking one-on-one, pronouns generally don't come into play. The minute we got 3 people or a group of people, we start talking about one another, we suddenly stop using a person's name and then assign pronouns to them and use those pronouns in place of a person's name. Do know that you can always use someone's name in place of pronouns. It just gets a little redundant in that you're always using that person's name, but you're not guessing, you're not assuming. And the important thing is that we just want to be respectful and not assume. I wouldn't walk up to you and just guess what name you go by, and I shouldn't be just walking up and assuming what pronouns you use either. And I certainly wouldn't critique and go, well, you don't look like a Stephanie. I'm not going to call you Sandy, I'm going to call you Stephanie. You look like a Stephanie. No, obviously we wouldn't do such thing. So we wouldn't do that with pronouns either. So if someone tells you what pronouns they use, what they go by, respect them and use them. And if anyone's ever taken it back, like, why are you asking me that? Isn't it obvious? You can simply respond, oh, I didn't mean to offend you. I just didn't want to make an assumption about you, as I hope that you wouldn't be making it. So that's okay to get out of that situation, hopefully. But the goal is that we just don't want to make assumptions as we've just historically been doing. And when we're talking about creating inclusive spaces, when we're talking about IDEA or DEI or whatever you use within your organization, pronoun usage and respect with people's pronouns is just part of that broader conversation. So it's not new. We haven't just started using pronouns. We've always been using pronouns. We're just being aware of being respectful, wanting to be respectful of one another. And so we just are shifting the focus in addition to many other aspects. But hey, we've been misgendering people for quite some time. We don't want to do that. We want to be respectful of all people. So that's part of that conversation. All right, so I mentioned I work at the Center on Colfax. You may be familiar with us, maybe not. We were founded in 1976. We're considered one of the older centers in the country and have grown to become the largest within the Rocky Mountain region. We have a number of different programs and services that I'll let me share with you. I always start with our youth program, which is called Rainbow Alley, which supports young people between the ages of 10 to 17. We just launched a new young adult program called Saga, which supports young adults between the ages of 18 to 24. On the other end of the spectrum, I like to highlight our West of 50 program. So for community members and allies that are 50 and better, that's the program for those folks. We have a transgender program, so we support trans and gender expansive adults 18 and older. We have a new disabilities program, so we're excited to celebrate the intersectionality between queer and disability identities. And so we have that new program that we launched earlier this year. We also just launched, or in the process of launching, a new mental health program. So we're going to provide mental health services for folks at no cost. And we know that there are significant barriers for access to healthcare. And so we wanted to eliminate that by providing this program as well. My program, which is Range Consulting, gives me the opportunity to provide training and consulting services for organizations. We produce Pride Fest. And so this past weekend, we hosted Pride Fest, which is one of the largest Pride festivals in the country, top 5. And we anticipate having well over 500,000 people participating. That's what we had last year. We felt like it was bigger this year. We'll get the final numbers soon. But hopefully you had an opportunity to participate in that. And then we, of course, are a community center. So we want to provide resources. We're open Monday through Friday and occasionally on Saturdays as well. So invite you to come check us out. All right, so for our basics, this is what we're gonna cover. So I want to go over some basic language and terminology. There's a workbook. So words down here. There's a workbook that includes a pretty extensive list of terminology. We're not covering all of it. We're just really going to focus on some basic language and terminology today, but I wanted to provide a pretty extensive list for you to have. I also have resources in both locally as well as national resources I want you to have. If we have time, we may be able to do an activity or two, but that's what you have with you is the workbook. There may be a notes document as well. If some of you like to take notes, you're welcome to use that as well. But we're going to focus on basic today. Talk about the heteronormativity and cisnormativity. These are assumptions, pervasive assumptions that we as a society make, which leads us to the next topic of coming out. We didn't have the assumption of everyone being heterosexual, the assumption of everyone being cisgender folks wouldn't have to come out. Talk about some best practices and then ways to create welcoming environments. I have Q&A baked at the end, but I certainly, if I'm able to answer questions along the way, but we certainly got time for that. We will be monitoring the chat for those that are watching this online to make sure that we address those questions as well. All right, so I introduced some group norms, and so you may have some as well, but these are some foundational ones that I invite us to be aware of. The first one is invite you to be present. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to participate today. I know there's a lot going on, so we are grateful for your time, your participation and attendance. If you need to step away, restrooms are right down this hallway here. If you want to just stretch your legs, get some coffee, some pastries, please do. If you need to step away and take a call, by all means do so. We just invite you to come back. Hopefully you'll join us as you're able to. This is the right place to ask the wrong question. I don't believe in dumb questions, silly questions. If you've got it, inevitably someone else may be in the room or online, they want to ask the same question. You're the first one to do it though. So I invite you to ask questions. This is hopefully, I want to create a brave space, ideally a safe space, but certainly want to create a brave space and feel comfortable to engage and ask questions. What stays and what leaves, I kind of call this the Vegas rule, in that someone may want to share a personal story or experience. I hope that we won't take that person's name that's associated with the story out of the space. We want to respect people's privacy. But what I hope you do take away are some of the concepts, things that we discussed, principles and best practices that you will hopefully take back to your own organizations, share with colleagues that aren't able to participate today. Want to make sure this resource is available. Thinking about impact versus intent. Our words and actions do carry meaning. And so just be mindful that while we may have good intent, sometimes the impact might be felt very differently. So just being mindful of that. And I invite you to think about that, not just now, but in the future as well. Sharing the airtime. I got a mic, I'm talking to you, but I want this to be a conversation as well. If you are comfortable asking questions, that's awesome, that's encouraged. I also want to create space for folks that might be a little bit more reserved so that they have an opportunity to ask questions and engage with the content as well. And finally, you can reserve the right to change your mind. We all come from different backgrounds, lived experiences. They're all valuable. They're all important. I'm not wanting to diminish any of those, but if at some point during either this presentation or just reflecting on some of the content, you might challenge some of the maybe belief system that you have or something that you may have about the LGBTQ+ community, that's encouraged, that's invited. I've got my contact information if you have questions beyond just this time that we're here together. I invite you to please reach out as well if you're not comfortable engaging in a group setting. How do you feel about these norms? Are there any additional ones that you'd like to add? I'm your guest and I want to be respectful of maybe group norms that you have when you come together. So any suggestions, critiques, any additions? All good? Excellent. All right, so I have a video that we have been testing. So I want to make sure I've got it set up for the folks online as well. Let it queue up here. And I'm going to hold the mic by my speakers. Everyone can hear it.
Individuality. It's something we all have in common, but for some, the thing that makes them different, being gay, lesbian, bi, trans, or intersex, marks them out for abuse. According to surveys, between half and 2/3 of LGBT youth experience bullying in childhood, forcing 1 in 3 to skip or even drop out of school. Many LGBT adolescents are rejected by their parents and end up living in the streets. Workplace discrimination is widespread. In a recent European survey, 1 in 5 LGBT people reported experiencing discrimination at work in the past year. Studies suggest rates of joblessness, poverty, food insecurity, and depression are all higher among members of the LGBT community. For the individuals in question, these are personal tragedies. For the wider community, they represent an enormous waste of human potential, of talent, of creativity, and productivity that weighs heavily on society and on the economy. The cost of homophobia and transphobia is simply colossal. From a shrunken labor force and a flight of talent to lost productivity. According to a recent World Bank pilot study, discrimination against lesbian, gay, bi, and trans people could be costing an economy the size of India's up to $32 billion a year. The drag on growth filters into lower tax receipts for the government, meaning less money for health, education, and other essential services. This cycle can be broken. More and more countries and companies recognize the benefits that flow from tackling homophobia and transphobia. For companies, that might mean adopting new corporate policies to make the workplace safe, fair, and accepting for all LGBT people. And looking at their business practices up and down the supply chain for ways to reinforce anti-discrimination efforts. For countries, it means new laws and effective public education and training. The result? A world that is free and equal, and more prosperous too.
Yeah, we're not gonna watch it twice. Okay, so I like to start with the video because I consider a why. Why is LGBTQ plus inclusion important? And so I just want to take a moment. What are your initial thoughts when you saw the video? As far as either the data or just the talking points, what resonates with you from seeing that video? Anyone? Yeah, so the representation of impacts, financial impacts, that might have been a different perspective in seeing this. Absolutely. I think for some people, emotion is important and that draws you in, but I think for others, data and talking about financial impacts might resonate with folks as well. So that's a common feedback that I receive. Like, I never really thought of it in that context. So thank you. Who else? Yeah.
Discrimination. I don't know.
Yeah, to see that, and I'm going to repeat the question just so folks can hear some. So forgive me, and if I paraphrase, forgive me if not. Correct me if I don't paraphrase well. So the reference to family rejection, the statistics that they showed was alarming. They maybe not aware of that. Absolutely. What else?
I'll piggyback that. I think it's different branches of discrimination.
Yeah. Other forms of discrimination, food insecurity, besides housing and shelter, absolutely to see those impacts of barriers rather than are created against LGBT plus folks. Very awesome. What else? Yeah, so the representation of discrimination in the workplace. Yeah, they covered a gamut, didn't they? From youth up to adults working and such. So seeing the 1 in 5 statistic, you maybe weren't familiar with. Okay. Yeah, and was there one last? Homelessness is huge. Yeah. Yeah, so for young people, so in shelters, at least 40% of folks in shelters, youth identify as LGBTQ+. We think that number is higher, but many of the shelters don't necessarily capture what we call SOGI or sexual orientation, gender identity statistics. Those that do, we're able to reflect and at least have that percentage, but it's families that are kicking their kids out because of their LGBTQ+ identity, which is astronomical to think about the number, the impacts. And not all shelters are accommodating to LGBTQ+ folks as well. So being mindful of that too. So, okay, so the goal from that, which I think is happening, was just thinking, giving the why it's important, looking at some statistics, both the impacts as well as the financial impacts and the emotional impacts that our community is experiencing. So let's get into some language and terminology. So we'll just, again, this is intended to be basics, but I want to start with sexual orientation. So this describes emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction, or limited or lacking that we may have entirely towards another person or people. That might be someone of another gender, same gender, all genders, or no gender at all. We, of course, all have a sexual orientation, but when we start talking about this, we immediately start thinking about the LGBTQ+ community. At what time in our lives do you think we typically start to gain a sense about our sexual orientation? So where our attractions may lie, might that be at birth, as a toddler, during adolescence and puberty, or as an adult? When do you think most of us get a sense about our sexual orientation? You can shout it out. Toddler, I heard. Okay. Teenager, okay. What else?
Say toddler.
Or another toddler, like an auctioneer. We got a toddler right now. Yeah, any other ideas or suggestions based on what we got here? Okay, so variety, so maybe multiple stages, okay. So when you said teen, I'm gonna go ahead and go with the adolescence puberty. And for most of us, that's exactly when we really gain a sense about where our attractions lie. And if you think about that, that's typically when we get a rush of hormones and really start to have a stronger feeling or connection towards one another. For most of us, it's during adolescence and puberty. However, just because we may have a certain attraction towards a particular person, people of a certain gender, that doesn't mean it can't change or evolve over time. That's perfectly normal and natural. That's certainly where questioning will apply, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But for most of us, at this point in our lives, is when we start to really gain an awareness about where our attractions are and who they're directed at. So let's go through some terms. I'm not going to read these slides verbatim, but I do want to highlight a few things about each. Lesbian is a very Eurocentric term. It's roots in the Greek island of Lesbos. And so some women that don't identify with European identity or just may not like the term lesbian, so they may not use that term to describe attraction towards other women or female identified folks. Women and non-binary folks can use this term, and non-binary, I'll have a slide in a moment, but that's really anybody who identifies outside of that binary construct of male or female. And so non-binary folks could, and women could use the term lesbian to describe themselves, or they may choose to use gay to describe that attraction to other females or women. Men, women, and non-binary folks can use the term gay. Know that gay has been historically used as an umbrella term for the community, but it's not as inclusionary as we think. We're focusing on a sexual orientation and really having attraction to some of the same gender. And so if you're using that term to be inclusive, just know that maybe be rather exclusionary. So that's where maybe LGBTQ, LGBT+, QIA, maybe queer, and I'm going to have a caveat to that one in a moment. Not everyone in our community uses that term. It historically has a very negative stigma. It can be kind of traumatic for some folks to hear that word, so know that not everyone in our community uses that. I'll talk about it a bit more in a moment. But know that gay, if you're using it as an umbrella term, is inclusionary as you might think. Bisexual, we tend to think the bi community is the smallest part of our LGBT plus community. It's the largest. Well over 50% of folks actually identify as being bisexual. However, we make a lot of assumptions about people based on who they may be in relationship with. If it's two men or two women together, we assume, oh, they're gay or lesbian. Either or both of those folks may identify as bisexual. We see a man and a woman together, we see, oh, they're heterosexual. Either or both of those folks may in fact identify as bisexual or even pan. I'll talk about pansexual in a moment, but There's a term called bi erasure, which is exactly that, the invisibility or lack of recognition of bisexual people. So I invite you to be mindful about maybe some assumptions that you make about people based on who they may be in relationship with. Pansexual, this may be considered a newer, broader term to describe anyone having attraction. The definitions are similar. The variation for bi happens to be attraction to more than one sex or gender, whereas pan may be having attraction to members of all genders. So not necessarily at the same time, the same level, or the same way. If someone identifies as non-binary, maybe they want to use, or maybe in relationship with someone non-binary, they may choose pansexual instead to be more inclusive. But that's far be it from me to say. They use the term bisexual to define that attraction. It's really up to the individual about what term best fits for them. So a few more. So asexual, this describes anyone who has limited or lacks sexual attraction towards another person or people. You might have the slang ace for that, which is a good term since we're in the restaurant conference as well. But we're referring to, in this context, asexual identity. Or aromantic would be anyone who has limited or lacks romantic attraction towards another person or people. Our attractions are varied. It's not one size fits all. So thinking about different levels of attraction. So romantic might just be an affinity towards someone or people without having the outcome being sexual intercourse or sexual activities. And whereas asexual or sexual certainly is that attraction to it, the degree of which there's physical or sexual intercourse or attraction that comes from that. We may be attracted to the same types of people, both sexually and romantically, or that might vary. Same gender loving, this is used oftentimes within the Black and African American communities. There's a lot of stigma associated with either homosexual, gay, lesbian, and bisexual identities. So same gender loving may be used instead. Heterosexual, of course, is sexual orientation too. I like the updated definition though. It's having the attraction to a member of a different gender. And so historically we said having attraction to something of the opposite sex or gender, and what we know that there's a spectrum of identities, and so the updated version is more inclusive. Know that folks in the LGBT+ community also identify as heterosexual. Trans folks can be heterosexual, so be mindful that folks can use that term within the LGBTQ+ community as well. Queer, so I talked about this a little earlier. This can be used as a sexual orientation or gender identity term, or both. But it's anyone who doesn't fit societal norms or expectations around gender or sexuality. So it's a term that's been reclaimed by our community. So youth, young adults, some older adults have reclaimed that term. As an ally, I would maybe suggest not coming out of the gate using that term for the entire community. If I was to walk into the center, since we serve a wide array of ages, I wouldn't just proclaim, hey, how are queers? I'd get a mixed bag of reactions because not everybody walks right up to that term. So just be aware of it. Questioning, as I mentioned a little earlier, just because we may have a certain type of attraction to people of a certain gender during adolescence and puberty, that doesn't mean that can change or evolve over time. So that's certainly worth questioning, what apply with exploring or questioning your sexual orientation. Any questions about these terms so far? I have personal reflections. This is just for you to sit with for a moment, but I just invite you to maybe think about the terms that I just covered. And is there a term that relates to you that you identify with? Or since this is just a basics course, there may be additional terms that I probably have covered in the workbook, but maybe there's another term for your sexual orientation identity. So don't have to share it, but just invite you to make this content relevant to yourselves. And so just invite you to think about those terms that we just covered. And now I'm going to pivot. So I talked about sexual orientation a moment ago, which is the attraction that we have towards another person or people. Now think about gender identity as that internal sense of how we see ourselves as being. It's not visible to others, but it's really how we identify when we look in the mirror. Our gender identity may or may not align with the biological sex that we were assigned at birth, but we all have a gender identity. So when we look in that mirror, how do we see ourselves as being? So what time in our lives do you think we typically start to gain a sense or an awareness about our gender identity? At birth, as a toddler, during adolescence and puberty, or as an adult? When do you think we first start to gain a sense about our gender identity? Shout it out. Toddler, I'm hearing that. You're assigned a sex.
Okay.
You're assigned a sex, yeah. Those gender reveals are naturally inaccurate. We have no idea what it is. It's not even a fully developed baby yet. So really should be, instead of gender reveal, should be sex reveal parties, but that doesn't really roll well. And people are like, what's going on here? One, they're dangerous because I don't know how many fires and how many things happen. But that's one, putting a tremendous amount of pressure on that child who's not even born yet. But really you're guessing based on some criteria what their biological sex may be. And it's not always accurate. But that's really looking at the biological sex, which I'll definitely talk about in a moment. But for most of us, as a toddler, so at an earlier age, we understand how we see ourselves as being. And if you think about it, there's a lot of things that happen to us at this early point in our lives. We've already had a few years of being exposed to gender clothing, gender role play, gender toys. We're interacting with other children. We're curious about our own bodies. We can articulate and many other factors as well. But we have a sense about how we see ourselves as being at this earlier age, earlier than our sexual orientation. That comes a bit later. But we understand how we see ourselves as being. Not one of our first words, not mama, daddy, gender identity, but we understand how we see ourselves as being at this early age. Most of us. That's not to say that we always have the support of our family, of our community, and such. And so, but it's not a new phenomenon throughout all of time and all places. Some children have expressed that they don't align with the sex that they're perceived as being. And we just now have more resources, a greater understanding, awareness about what gender identity actually means. And granted, we've seen a lot of negative aspects and a lot of legislation, but kids know how they understand themselves to be at an early age, and it's up to parents and community to catch up with those kiddos and certainly find credible resources to support. But I'll talk about questioning in a little bit, but just because we may have an awareness or an understanding about our gender at this early age, again, because of either lack of support or really a lack of full awareness, we might question or explore that later in life, and that's perfectly normal and natural as well. Okay, so let's go through some terms specific around gender identity. So transgender, of course, we're familiar with this language. It's anyone whose understanding or awareness of their gender doesn't happen to match or is incongruent with the biological sex that they were assigned at birth. It may be applied both to gender identity and expression. I'll talk about gender expression in a moment. Whereas cisgender would describe anyone whose understanding about their gender identity does match or is congruent with the biological sex that they're assigned at birth. You might be very familiar with trans language, but cis might be newer to you. These are Latin terms, so cis meaning on the side of, and trans loosely interpreted as to cross over. And so we've historically been using really offensive, stigmatizing language to describe cisgender people, maybe biological male, biological female, real man, real woman. These are offensive, these are stigmatizing, and we should be using cis language instead. If you're referring to yourself or someone else whose internal sense, their gender identity does match or is congruent with biological sex, that they're assigned at birth, and we say assigned at birth because that's literally what happens when we're born. Someone typically makes a visual assessment. I'll talk about that a bit more, but it kind of follows us out through the remainder of our lives. Gender expansive, this is considered an umbrella term to describe really anyone who expands the notion around gender identity or expression beyond perceived or expected social gender norms. So think about some of these terms. So either gender queer, gender nonconforming, or non-binary is being under that umbrella. This is really anyone who just pushes back against expectations or norms around gender. This could be a man wearing makeup, nail polish, and maybe historically feminine looking clothes or vice versa, but anyone pushing those norms or expectations may in fact be considered gender expansive. just to go in a little bit deeper with the non-binary reference that I used earlier, anyone who does not exclusively identify as masculine or feminine or just outside of that binary construct altogether. Know that some folks who identify themselves as non-binary may also identify as transgender, but don't always assume that someone who identifies as non-binary also identifies as being transgender. The Williams Institute, which is a think tank out of UCLA School of Law, determined about 1.2 million people identify as non-binary. We think that number is larger. However, because we don't get to disclose that on a census or don't have a way of capturing that information universally in all places and spaces, we have to extrapolate that data anecdotally. And so that's what the Williams Institute had determined based on a lot of that data extrapolation, but we do anticipate that number to be larger. So a couple more terms. So two-spirit. So within Native and Indigenous communities, this an individual that may fulfill either a third gender or other gender variant role. Oftentimes there's a ceremonial aspect to this identity. If you don't identify as Native or Indigenous, you wouldn't use this term to describe yourself. Queer and questioning, talked about these before. Again, queer can be used as a sexual orientation or gender identity or both. And questioning in this context is really just anyone who's exploring, questioning their gender identity. Again, just because we may have an understanding of it as at the early age as a toddler doesn't mean that we have a full grasp of it, nor have the support or resources. And so we may question that at later time in our lives. So just thinking about these gender identity terms, of course, we all have one. Does one of the identities resonate with you personally, or might there be another identity that you identify with beyond just this basics curriculum that we're covering today? So just don't have to share it. But again, just want to make that personal connection with the information. So just a few more gender terms, and then we'll get into some other content. So gender expression. So this where gender identity is that very personal, not invisible to others, really that internal sense of how we see ourselves as being. Think about your gender expression as the very public way that you present your gender to the world. That can be through a variety of different attributes. It's your clothing, hair, makeup, mannerisms, and so many other attributes. We all have a gender expression, and I tend to think this might be the most fluid, in that we may present ourselves one way professionally and maybe very differently in our private lives, and for a lot of different reasons, but that could be the most fluid. We all have a gender expression as well. Here's some examples of what terms that could be used. Masculine or feminine, androgynous, or other terms could apply to this. We make the most assumptions about people based on criteria that we see. We're kind of scanning one another, looking for masculine and feminine characteristics, and then we usually ascribe maybe a pronoun to that person. We may be right, we may be wrong. Certainly for non-binary folks, we wouldn't necessarily know that. And so I just invite us again, coming back to the pronouns, it's a good idea just to share your pronouns and inviting others to do the same, because we may misinterpret how someone presents their gender through their gender expression. Biological sex, this is considered a medical term. We typically, there's a lot of different characteristics, but we tend to focus solely based on our external genitalia. So when we're either born or right before we're doing that sonogram, whatever, we're looking for it's medical language that we're using. Again, just because someone may be assigned a certain sex at birth, that doesn't mean it may or may not correlate with their gender identity. But it's at a deeper level than that. It's at the chromosomal, hormonal, anatomic characteristics. And so we've been taught that there's really two options: boy, girl, male, female, but there really are three. The third being intersex, and that's an individual who has any variation in the chromosomal, hormonal, anatomic, or external sex characteristics, any of those. And we've had an outdated and a very stigmatizing term we've used, which is hermaphrodite. That term does apply in science and nature. There are plants and animals that can reproduce independently, but humans can't. So it's an offensive and stigmatizing term, inaccurate for humans. So if you're referring to anyone who has variations in any of these characteristics, intersex would be the correct term. About 2% of the population identify as intersex. It's about the same percentage as people that identify as redheads. So it's not as uncommon as we think. And it's through a variation of different attributes. There's about, I think, anywhere between 24 to 27 variations of intersex. And again, that's either chromosomal, hormonal, anatomic, or sex characteristics. So just be aware of some of the assumptions that we might make about identities. And I think historically we've seen medical intervention or the need to intervene that can cause real trauma and harm to that kiddo, to that child. And so best practice recommendations, let that child decide for themselves when they're ready. And many states, including Colorado, have outlawed medical intervention without at least consulting the family. And so there have been many reports of doctors just trying to fix something. It's just a variation. It's not an abnormality. It's not a defect. It's just a variation. And so best practice would be to let that child decide for themselves. Support, affirm them in their identity, and let them decide for themselves. Okay, I'm a visual person, so I like to just use this. It's called the gender unicorn. There's other iterations of this, the gender red person, what have you, but this is considered more inclusive in that it has a lot of more diverse identities or characteristics that are represented. And so this is in the workbook. And I invite you, we don't need to do this activity now, but I do invite you to think about it as you're doing a self-assessment later. But thinking about some of the terms that we have covered here. So we talked about gender identity earlier, and this is how it relates to the gender unicorn. And then these are some of the characteristics. You might take on female, woman, girl, male, man, boy, or maybe other genders. You may take on variations of any or all of these, or maybe exclusively one or none. If you didn't take on one of the characteristics or any, then you'd be on the far left-hand side here, but thinking about it's a spectrum, if you will, and so there may be variations of these characteristics that you take on. Gender expression, so the options feminine, masculine, or other. You might take on variations of some of these. Sex assigned at birth, we talked about earlier, female, male, intersex, and this is how it correlates to the gender unicorn there. And then this activity uses different language. So I said sexual and romantic. This one uses physical, which can be interchangeable with sexual, and emotional can be used interchangeably with romantic. And then the variations of woman, men, or other genders, it could be different iterations of any of these or not. And then there may be, we may be attracted to different, to different people physically as well as emotionally. There may be variation there. So if we did this activity now and we all held our sheets up, I can guarantee that no two people would line up exactly the same because we identify uniquely from one another. And so I think this is just a really useful tool that I invite you to either, to use as an activity or do a personal reflection. I've got the website link down here. It's transstudent.org/gender. So it's a great tool, great resource. And then just to kind of see gender expressions that outline here that we see of the unicorn, and then the hearts there, of course, are the different levels of attraction we have. So any questions about this activity or any of the terms that we've covered so far? How are we doing online? Any questions? Okay, awesome. All right. We'll take a break. I didn't mention that earlier. Let's give it maybe 5 or 10 more minutes. You can take a break on your own at any time, of course, but then maybe we'll take a 5-minute break and stretch your legs and such and get back. But I've just got a few more things I'd like to cover in this segment. So I want to talk about this pervasive assumption that we have as a society. And so this first one is heteronormativity. So thinking that the assumption that everyone identifies as heterosexual, or that being heterosexual is superior to any other sexual orientation. Of course, I talked about several of those terms earlier. This can lead to a concept or level of gender normativity and gender roles, maybe the assumption that individuals should identify as men or women, that you should be masculine men or feminine females, women, and that men and women are a complementary pair. And so I just invite you to be aware of maybe some of the assumptions that we make about people. I'll give you a few examples of what heteronormativity can look like. If you see a woman with a wedding ring, you go, oh, I see you're married. Tell me about your husband. That's heteronormativity. We're assuming that couple, she is a heterosexual woman with a heterosexual man, so that's just what heteronormativity could look like. If you saw a man in the park pushing a stroller and thought, oh, that's so nice, he's giving mom a break. I mean, that's heteronormativity again, that like the assumption. When we look at that guy, knows we get over this, there's a lot to unpack with that activity, but we assume first that they know that child, but we're also maybe assuming that he's the father, and mom's at home giving her a break. That's heteronormativity. If you see people the same gender holding hands or being affectionate, oh, that's odd, it's unusual, that could be heteronormativity. So just be aware of some of the assumptions that you see or that you may have about folks. At its worst, heteronormativity can manifest itself into homophobia, that being a variety of different negative attributes: fear, anger, intolerance, resentment, erasure, or discomfort that one may have towards LGBTQ, and I've intentionally left trans out at the moment. Talk about trans in a moment with another term. Or it could be fear of being perceived as LGBTQ. A lot of folks in the community, I can speak for myself, have internalized this hatred. So internalized homophobia can exist as well, and that's based on hatred and intolerance because of the negative either things I've heard, that maybe not me, but in this context that I heard from my own family, community, and such. And so a lot of this hatred and intolerance can be internalized. So just be aware that this does relate not only to folks, the perception of being, but also internalized by folks within the LGBTQ+ community as well. It also can manifest into biphobia, that being hatred, intolerance, resentment, erasure, discomfort with bisexual people, or the fear of being perceived as bisexual. Biphobia exists within the LGBTQ+ community. There's a lot of work that we need to do within the LGBTQ+ community to eradicate this. So it's not just something that exists outside of the LGBTQ+ community. So just we've got work to do in our own homes, so in our own yard, if you will. So I want to pivot now to cis-normativity, which is another pervasive assumption that we have in society. The assumption everyone identifies as cisgender, meaning that your gender identity aligns with or matches your biological sex assigned at birth, or just solely focusing on biological sex, period, and not recognizing one's gender identity. And so we all obviously need to be mindful of assumptions that we make about people. Cisnormativity might look like if you see someone presenting femininely, assuming that it's a woman, someone presenting masculinely, assuming that it's a man. If you get frustrated looking for cues and getting, you can't discern someone's identity solely based on what your expectations or assumptions are, that might be cisnormativity at play. So just be aware of some of the assumptions that you may be making, perhaps inadvertently. At its worst, cisnormativity can manifest itself into transphobia, this being fear, anger, resentment, intolerance, hatred, if you will, towards transgender people, the trans community, or any form of gender ambiguity. Know that this exists within the LGBTQ+ community as well. This is not a we need to eradicate. It's not just an issue outside of the LGBTQ+. We've got a lot of work to do even within the LGBTQ+ community. So any questions about these terms or these kind of assumptions that society, this is not just exclusive to the United States and here, this is around the world as well. But any questions or thoughts about these terms that I just described to you? Are you familiar with these? Maybe not necessarily knowing the term per se, or able to recite the definition, but are you aware of maybe some of these assumptions that play out in our society and culture? Seeing some head nods. Okay. So yeah, I just invite us to maybe challenge some of the assumptions that we made. So one last thing, and then we'll take a break. So because of the assumption that everyone is heterosexual and or everyone identifies as cisgender, if we didn't have these assumptions, folks in the community would need to come out. And I've expanded this definition coming out to include not just gender identity and sexual orientation, but to include HIV status. You need to come out about that identity, maybe around racial identity or disability. You may have to disclose any of these, but I'm going to lean in a bit more around coming out about sexual orientation or gender identity for the moment. It is harmful, unhelpful, and can cause real trauma to out someone without their approval, without their consent. So even just trying to be helpful, that can cause more harm than good. I'm not an attorney, I don't play one on TV, but it may be perceived as a form of discrimination or harassment if you're doing it maliciously, especially in the workplace. If you're trying to just do, if you have ill intent or just want to cause harm, that may be perceived as a form of discrimination or harassment. So not giving legal advice, but just be aware of that. But it's rooted in readiness, willingness, and trust that folks come out about their sexual orientation generated here or any of these. And so this is just a simple graph giving some highlights. So do know it's a sign of trust. If someone comes out to you, they feel ready, they want to, and so ideally thank that person for trusting you, to share that information. Don't say I've always known or downplay the significance of them sharing that with you. Certainly we see a lot of negative laws and legislation and a lot of hateful rhetoric out. So now more than ever, if someone does disclose, it takes a lot of faith to do that. Do check in. It's okay to ask how confidential it is. So if you're in a work setting and someone, your colleague comes out to you about their sexual orientation and gender identity, thank you so much. Who else on the team knows? It's okay to ask that. In your personal life, so family member, a friend, thank you so much. Always thank them. Who else knows in our family? Who else knows in our friend circle? What can I do to support you? Don't become the town crier. So you don't need to run around. I got a gay friend, or trans colleague, whatever. It's not your story. It's not really your place. So you may be really excited and want to, but really be mindful, especially for that confidentiality aspect of it. Do remember that their sexuality, gender, HIV, race, or disability status is just one dimension of who they are. We're all multidimensional. We're not monolithic. But don't forget that they're still the same person you knew, befriended, or loved before they shared this with you. You just now know something more about them. You know them better. And they care enough about you to want to share this part of themselves with you. Do show interest or curiosity about this new part, identity that they've shared with you, but don't cross personal boundaries or probe and ask inappropriate questions or cross boundaries that you wouldn't have done prior to them sharing that with you. And that probably seems obvious, but you'd be so surprised. Our trans family community that shares how many times when they've disclosed that they're transitioning or transgender, they're asked about their anatomy, about medical history, which is inappropriate. You shouldn't be, it's inappropriate for you to disclose that or be asked that. So it's obviously inappropriate to be asking probing questions for LGBTQ folks in general. Do ask how you can best support that person, but don't necessarily assume to know why they came out to you. It was just the right time, the right place. They felt ready to do that with you. So, any questions about this? I think our allies think it's a one and done. Johnny's out. Everybody knows, unless I had a sign, unless I had a pin, you wouldn't necessarily know. And it's a series of decisions that we have to make all the time because of those assumptions that I mentioned earlier that, I see a wedding ring, we're asking someone, assuming that they're heterosexual and such things. But I think in a perfect world, we're getting there. But if we just don't assume that everyone's heterosexual, we'll assume everyone's cisgender and just ask open-ended questions. Hey, I see that you have a ring. Tell me about your partner or your spouse. We're not assuming, we're not making judgment. Here we're leaving an open-ended question. And then that person can share with you. Don't course correct, of course. And thanks for asking my husband or my wife or whatever language they may use for spouse regularly. But then you're just, not making assumptions. I think that's how we'll see it diminish so that folks don't have to feel so compelled to have to correct you or share information based on assumption that you might be making. All right, I feel like this is a good time to maybe take a quick break. How about we take a 5-minute break? And then we'll just get right back into talking. So, and I'm happy to answer any questions during the break as well. So thank you. Okay, so I want to share another video. And this one's specific about pronouns. I talked about pronouns a little bit earlier, but this video gives a bit more context. And it's just kind of nice to hear it from someone else instead of just me talking to you. So this will hopefully answer some additional questions you might have about using pronouns and when it makes sense and how to do it. So let me set this up for you.
The first time you ask someone what pronouns they use, it may feel awkward. You may even be worried that you'll offend the person. But assuming someone's gender and getting it wrong could actually be more offensive. This is called misgendering. If you happen to misgender someone, acknowledge your mistake, but be aware that over-apologizing can just make things more uncomfortable. Just say you're sorry and move on. As with anything else, practice makes perfect, so let's walk through some examples to make it less intimidating. Here we are at the local library. Oh, sorry. Here we are at the local library with Brian and Star. Brian greets Star at the book club meeting.
Hi, my name is Brian. I use the pronouns he and him. How about you?
What's great about this scenario is that Brian shares his own pronouns before he asks for Star's. This breaks the ice and makes the exchange conversational rather than one-sided. Sometimes, you might be mid-conversation and realize that you never asked for the person's pronouns. It's not too late. If that were to happen, Brian might say,
Star, I just realized I never asked what pronouns you use.
Asking about pronouns is becoming more common, but not everyone is used to doing it. Putting pronouns into practice sometimes involves managing reactions. If Star responds with,
Why are you asking me this? Isn't it clear?
Brian might say,
I ask everyone this question because I want to be respectful and not make any assumptions.
If Star is like,
Pronouns? What do you mean?
Brian might respond,
I mean, do you use the pronouns he, him, she, her, they, them, or something else?
Keep in mind, singling people out can make them feel uncomfortable, so if you're in a group setting, you'll want to ask everyone what pronouns they use, not just the people you're unsure about. And be sure to share your pronouns as well. Whether you realize it or not, by doing this on a regular basis, you're changing the culture around you.
So those were neo-pronouns, and I didn't want to interrupt the video, but they gave the example at the top of the screen. It was Z hears, or Z here, and those are some examples of what neo-pronouns can look like. And neo stands for new, and so we may see iterations of other non-gender pronouns that folks can use instead of maybe they and theirs, or maybe masculine and feminine pronouns don't fit for that individual, so they may be using neo pronouns as well. And I've got that as a definition in the workbook, and you can see some examples of that. I do a workshop specifically on pronouns, and so I'd lean in even more, but for the basics, and just for the sake of time, I won't spend a tremendous amount of time, but know that those are some examples of additional pronouns that folks can use instead of maybe they and theirs. Those are called neo pronouns again. So just a few things I want to just discuss from a basics level. Obviously, ideally starting with your own, or you're meeting someone. No, that's, if you didn't do that at the beginning. And I know this was a library, so we'll use some real life examples of other types of interactions, but nonetheless, I hope you gleaned something from this. Obviously, when you're addressing a table, you're meeting someone, you might share your own name. Why not throw your pronouns in? But you're not going to ask everyone at a table. So you wouldn't be asking them what their names are, but a way in which pronouns can be respectful is just using they, them, theirs pronouns. When you're referring to a group of people or even an individual, instead of assuming and giving gender pronouns, that person say, the person, the city, you may know, there may be different ways to describe, maybe using an article of clothing, the person wearing so-and-so, or whatever that might be. So use something as a distinguisher, or using they and their pronouns, and not saying, she asked for this, he wants that, the person wearing blah, blah, blah. Could be a great way. The person wearing a hat, whatever that, if they're wearing a hat, if everyone's wearing a hat, say something else, but other criteria without gendering that person or making an assumption would be very helpful. Do it consistently, don't just pick and choose. So if you're going to share your pronouns, do it consistently for everybody, not just people you're unsure of. That'll make them feel targeted or make them uncomfortable, make it feel like you're picking on them. And obviously, the more frequently you do it, the more you're normalizing it, and it won't be as big a deal. Obviously, the first few times you do it, it's like, oh, how do I do this? What should I do? How should I say it? Blah, blah, blah. Well, figure out whatever makes sense for you. It can be formal, informal, whatever, but the more consistent you do it, the more top of mind it'll be and the easier it'll be to remember. We're seeing it more and more frequently. I've got it on my name tag. We've got it on our name tags. If you've got a lanyard or something, maybe having pronouns pins are helpful. So then folks, it demonstrates inclusion. When I walk in to a restaurant, a place of business, and see someone's got their pronouns, I know that they're being thoughtful about it. They don't want to make an assumption, and more than likely they're not going to be misgendering folks. And so just that matters. If someone's ever offended, so why are you asking me? isn't it obvious, or what do you mean when you talk about, oh, I just didn't want to make an assumption about you, as I hope you believe me. That's hopefully a way to get out of that situation. It's not political. We just have forever, we've been misgendering people. We just have. We've been making assumptions about people, but as we're striving as businesses, as organizations to be more inclusive, part of that journey includes being respectful of people's pronouns and recognizing for people for who they are. We want people to be seen. We want them to be heard as well. If you make a mistake, I make mistakes all the time. I'm not perfect. I don't expect you to be perfect. If you are, and I'm not. So we all make mistakes. So if you do, you just acknowledge, apologize, and move on. Or alternatively, thank that person. Thank you so much for correcting me. And then move on. Don't make it about you. It's not woe is me. I'm such a bad person. I can't believe I did that. You're just digging a hole. And suddenly you're making the focus on you instead of the mistake that you made. So again, just acknowledge, apologize, move on, or thank that person and move on. If you haven't met someone yet, you're not sure, and you're referring to them, start with they, them, theirs pronouns. So just using, instead of gendering that person, just say, oh, I haven't met them yet. I don't know what they do. This might be theirs. And so that's a safe way to start. Any questions about this? And of course, your name, you can always use that person's name. It just might seem a little redundant, but that's safe as well. Just referring that person by their name. Okay, so 10 things you may actually be saying when you ignore someone's pronouns. So obviously, as I just mentioned, there's a difference between making a mistake, and this is really referring to you're just being obstinate, you're being, just not honoring, not respecting that person based on their pronouns. These are 10 things you're conveying to them. I know you better than you know yourself. I'd rather hurt you repeatedly than change the way that I speak about you. Your sense of safety is not important. Your identity isn't real and shouldn't be acknowledged. I want to teach everyone around me to disrespect you. Offending you is fine if it makes me feel more comfortable. I can hear you talking, but I'm not really listening. Being who you truly are is an inconvenience to me. I'd prefer to stop being honest with me. And I'm not an ally, a friend, or someone you can trust. I think individually these are pretty powerful, but you think collectively on the impact of what you're conveying to that person when you refuse to honor respective pronouns. So I just want to talk about some of the impacts that one can feel by being misgendered. It can lead to higher rates of stress, anxiety, depression, disengagement. So that might be, decreased participation or, involvement within projects, activities, maybe departing from an organization altogether, and in extreme cases, suicidal thoughts and actions. So you may take your pronouns for granted. You may not just kind of navigate through the world without much awareness of it, but a lot of people experience a lot of discrimination, harassment, and trauma because people refuse to honor their pronouns or make assumptions about people based on their appearance, and that can be really harmful. So I got another video, quick one about they, them. And then I've got one last video at the end, but.
They, them pronouns are hard to start but easy to master. You actually probably use them without even realizing. For example, imagine someone knocks at your door. You might say, "Someone's at the door," and in response, "What do they want?" Here the parent has addressed the person at the door with they. Of course, we have no knowledge of the person's gender, and therefore have no reason to attach a more boxed pronoun such as he or she to them. Now, to get more comfortable with using they, them pronouns, become more aware of when you use pronouns day to day. A lot of the time, people make assumptions based on certain physical looks, gestures, and mannerisms to calculate their own preconceived idea of someone's gender. Wouldn't it be easier just to use they, them until you had the chance to personally ask what pronouns they use? This avoids accidentally calling, for example, a person she, when in actuality he prefers he, him. Oftentimes, I'll introduce myself by saying my pronouns. This encourages the other to do the same. They, them pronouns can be used outside of people as well. Whoa, look at that dog! I think they're a bulldog mix. Lastly, know that some people don't mind using more than one set of pronouns. In those instances, it's most common for you just to use them interchangeably. But in the end, remember that it's okay to mess up. We've all been there. Just move on from it and try again next time.
So one of the things I didn't mention, I don't think, and they just discussed it is that some folks may use different types of pronouns. That you might see, they use he and they and she, but that's an invitation to use those pronouns interchangeably. So just be aware, you have to keep track how many times am I saying this one and how many times, so I need to say it equally. No, don't put any extra pressure on yourself, but that's just an invitation for you to be aware that they may use variations of pronouns. And so you can see that, just know you can use those interchangeably. Okay, so let's go through some best practices. These are just some recommendations. Just for the sake of time, I may not go through the example each and every time, but just some things to avoid saying. I talked about this earlier. Let's avoid saying hermaphrodite when we're talking about biological sex. Instead, we would use intersex. Hermaphrodite, stigmatizing, inaccurate word with a negative medical history. Let's avoid saying homosexual, instead gay or lesbian. And the reason is that we often, connote a medical diagnosis with the term homosexual, or maybe a lack of or discomfort with gay and lesbian people. When they were looking at repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell for the military, they offered 2 surveys to active service members. The first one said, would you have an issue serving alongside a fellow homosexual service member? Significantly low rates of acceptance and support. But when they took the word homosexual out and put, would you have an issue serving alongside gay or lesbian service members? Significantly higher rates of support and acceptance. There's just a lot of stigma associated with the word homosexual. Let's avoid saying born female or born male. Let's avoid saying female bodied or male bodied, and certainly not real woman, real man. Instead, we would just say assigned female or assigned male at birth, because that's ultimately what happens. Someone makes a visual assessment and they assign it to us, and it kind of follows us throughout the entirety of our lives. And in some more clinical settings, you might see or hear F to M, female to male, or M to F, male to female. That's just where they're transitioning, and that's really very binary. They've gone from female to male or male to female. If someone identifies as a trans man or a trans woman, you're referring to their transition to that gender at the time. And so, and know that not everyone transitions in the binary. So someone may transition from male to non-binary, female to non-binary as well. So just be aware of that. I kind of went through why we do that in my examples already. Let's avoid saying a gay, a lesbian, a bisexual, a transgender. It's not a noun, and we certainly don't want to use it as a verb. You're not transgender or cisgender either. We're using it as an adjective or a descriptor for either an individual or a community. And I always hear that the ED at the end, I've heard that quite often, so just be aware that it's not a past tense verb, not a verb at all. Let's avoid saying transgender people and normal people. We would say transgender people and cisgender. We say normal, and it implies abnormal, which is very stigmatizing and offensive. Let's avoid saying both genders or opposite sexes. Instead, let's just say all genders. Both implies only 2, and opposite can reinforce an antagonism amongst genders. These are some tough ones. So let's avoid, as you're addressing a group, ladies and gentlemen, guys, ma'am or sir, dudes. Even if you're coming to a table, hey ladies, how are you doing? We just did that as an example earlier. We don't know that for certain. So let's use non-gendered language, like everyone, folks. Honored guests maybe a little bit much. But y'all, so we can use, I have an accent, I'm from Texas, so I have a draw from time to time. Don't magically get one if you're using that term. If you're not all of a sudden 7. And so, so if you're using you all, you don't necessarily have to have a draw with it. But we want to move away from binary language when we're referring to be more inclusive to people of all genders. Let's avoid gendered roles, so firemen, mailmen, policemen, congressmen, chairmen, what have you. There's many others that I don't have listed here, but let's use more inclusive language like mail clerk, firefighter, police officer, congressperson, chairperson, what have you, because we know that people of all genders perform these roles. Let's avoid saying it when we're referring to someone, especially if we don't know their pronouns. It's an inanimate object. Sorry, I can't speak this morning. It's not a person or a thing. There may be a rare instance where someone tells you, very rarely, that someone asks me, they want to use the term it to describe themselves. They're the exception, not the rule, but someone clearly told me that. Very rare, but if someone does say, I use the pronoun it, then I'm only going to use that term with that individual. Generally speaking, though, referring, it's used as an inanimate object. Let's avoid saying gay marriage or gay wedding. In a perfect world, if I said wedding or marriage, you wouldn't necessarily assume heterosexual. We're not quite there yet. But if you are referring to same-sex, let's use same-sex language, because bi people can be married to people of the same gender, but we don't want to assume that they're gay. So same-sex marriage or same-sex wedding would be appropriate. Again, gay, when we're talking about a community or pride, used to be thought of it as inclusionary, though it's rather exclusionary. So maybe LGBTQ, LGBTQIA, LGBTQ plus, what have you, is a more inclusive way, broader, to represent all identities. If we're not sure, let's not start with wife or husband, boyfriend or girlfriend. So is there anyone special? You know, do you have a partner, spouse, special someone, whatever? We just don't want to assume or perpetuate heteronormativity or make assumptions about a person's gender in their relationship. Let's avoid saying sexual preference or lifestyle or gender preference. I don't necessarily hear that one as often, but we're really referring to someone's sexual orientation or gender identity. Who you are and who you love is not a hobby, or, you know, a lifestyle. I can think of lots of examples of lifestyles. If you like to go hiking or read books, if you like to sew, whatever, those are lifestyles. You follow a sports team, that's a lifestyle, but who you are and who you love is not. And so I just would ask a heterosexual person, is you being heterosexual a lifestyle? Well, then obviously being gay, lesbian, bi, trans, whatever is also, it applies the same as well there too. Any questions about these kind of best practices or clarification on any of that? Are we doing online? Any questions or anything? Okay. All right, we're in the finishing on the home stretch here. So ways to create welcoming environments, and then I really wanted to lean in on how we apply this in your day-to-day, because I mean, obviously you have high level. I want to be real specific to the work that you do and ways to be more inclusive. So we look for visual cues, folks in the LGBTQ plus community. These are just a few examples. By no means is this exhaustive, looking at some variations of decals or flags, if you will, but I just wanted to talk about a few. So you might see the equal sign. So this is HRC, the Human Rights Campaign. It's a national LGBTQ plus advocacy organization. So allies and folks in the community that support their work get that decal. So you might see that. This is considered newer, although there's a newer iteration. This is called the progress flag. And so it takes on different variations of our flag. So we've got the traditional rainbow, and then we've got the pink, white, and blue, which is for the trans flag. We obviously want to celebrate the racial diversity within our community. I've also seen the intersex flag in this white section or part of the white slide. So you might see a newer iteration of that, and that's even more up to date than what I've got there. Obviously rainbow, I see rainbow lanyards all over the place. And so they're visual cues for folks to know that it's an inclusive, safe space. You know, putting your pronouns on your business cards and name tags, demonstrate your thoughtfulness. If you've got your anti-discrimination, anti-harassment policy on your website, making sure that you may have a printed copy as you're walking into a business so that folks can look to see that representation there. And also, if you've got visual representation on your website of different people that you celebrate diversity, make sure you have LGBTQ folks represented there as well too. See, representation matters. So that is an extra step, and that demonstrates that you're being thoughtful about all people and communities. This is something I strive to do. I'm not perfect and I expect you to be either, but just let's strive not to make assumptions. So ask open-ended questions. If you're inquiring about a person's relationship status, again, maybe starting with partner or spouse, instead of husband or wife, someone special instead of boyfriend or girlfriend, and don't assume the gender of the person. And know that allies are welcome to use this language too. If someone says, oh, I have a partner, don't assume that they're part of the LGBTQ plus community. Know that we're normalizing this language, and so allies are welcome to use this language too. If you're asking about youth or family structure, maybe starting with adult or caregiver instead of parent, mother or father. And the reason why I included parent is that we know that family structures are diverse and dynamic. It may be extended family, it may be non-biological folks that are people taking care of kiddos. And so know that it's not always biological parents. And then mother and father, give mommy, daddy. where if that child has same-sex parents, they may have to decide whether to out their family in that moment. So be aware of that. And for parents of non-binary kiddos, just asking, do you have a son or a daughter? They may have to make a decision about whether they out their non-binary kiddo as well. So just maybe starting with, do you have any children or kids, kiddos, whatever. But we're not assuming or assigning gender to those children. And then let's not assume everyone's in a monogamous relationship. So there are a lot of polyamorous and other non-monogamous relationship structures. So just be mindful of some assumptions that we might be making about relationship structures. As much as we learn, we have to unlearn a few things. And so these are just some examples of different expressions or things that we can say and they impact various communities. So thinking about people with disabilities, using blind spot, colorblind, or tone deaf to refer to a circumstance or a situation can be offensive. For Indigenous folks, using powwow, spirit animal, too many chiefs, not enough Indians, that's offensive and can be stigmatizing to Native and Indigenous folks. Ratchet, boy, or ghetto can be really offensive to Black and African American communities. Talking about, that's crazy when we're referring to a circumstance or situation can be really offensive and stigmatizing to people with mental or behavioral health issues. So gay, I've heard that forever. It's usually a young person saying, so gay. I'm like, well, let's find another, what are you trying to describe? And let's find another way to describe that. I put the asterisk next to queer because not everyone in our community embraces that term. So just be very mindful that it may not land well with folks in the community. You can generally mirror that language with someone if they self-identify using that term. And we talked about these more recently: sexual preference, don't say that, lifestyle, cisgendered or transgendered. Are there other terms that you have questions about? This is just a very high level, quick look. Are there other terms or expressions that you've heard you might have a question about? They come to you later, then you can always reach out. Ways you can demonstrate inclusion at work, actively communicating your organization's support around LGBTQ+ inclusion. Thank you for participating in this workshop and celebrating events, as you hopefully will do for other communities as well. Ensuring that inclusion is represented throughout the organization. We tend to just think about HR only carrying the torch for this, but really everyone in the organization has a role to play, and the lens may be slightly different. I talked about marketing earlier, so thinking about how are you representing folks, and don't tokenize people in those circumstances. So you need to be living into those values before you start representing those communities or identities. Holding your coworkers, customers, community members, patrons, whatever, accountable for homophobic, transphobic, biphobic discrimination, bullying behavior, and language in your personal lives. Maybe just being informed on what policies, laws, or legislation impacts the LGBTQ+ community, and where do people that represent you stand? Not just at the state, not just at the city, state, and federal levels, but at your school board and at various levels throughout. Who represents you and how do they feel about the LGBTQ+ community? And then thank folks. It's not always just the negative, but thank those folks if they're doing things good to support LGBTQ+ in other communities as well. Reading books and articles, watching films, TED Talks, or documentaries that are created by LGBTQ+ folks. Certainly this month, you can, on almost any streaming thing you can find, there's going to be a segment about LGBTQ+ inclusion. We're a diverse community, so there's so many wonderful perspectives. We're not monolithic, so you can gain so much insight by finding those opportunities, volunteering or participating with organizations or attending events that are hosted by, produced by LGBTQ+ folks, inviting partners and spouses of LGBTQ+ folks to participate in things that you're doing. And finally, if you're holding your coworkers and colleagues accountable at work, we should be holding our family and friends accountable for these bullying behaviors. It usually starts as a joke, but it's not funny, and then your silence can may indicate that you support that type of behavior as well. So just if you're able to just say, I don't think that's funny, or you can always say, could you repeat yourself? You would be so surprised. Someone may think that they could slide something by, but just asking, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Could you say that thing? That may be the first way of, one, you're on to them, and then they may think twice about what they're about to say or what they just said. So I have one last video and then I'm gonna open it up for Q&A. It's not there. I need to go.
Ah, ¿vais a venir? Pues claro, estupendamente. Aquí estamos.
She may be the face I can't forget, a trace of pleasure or regret, maybe my treasure or the price I have to pay. She may be the song that summer sings, maybe the chill that autumn brings, maybe 100 different things within the measure of a day. She may be the beauty or the beast, may be the famine or the feast, may turn each day into a heaven or a hell. She may be the mirror of my dreams, a smile reflected in a stream. She may not be what she may seem inside her shell. She may be the reason I survive, the way and wherefore I'm alive, the one I'll care for through the rough and ready years. Me, I'll take her laughter and her tears, for where she goes I've got to be. The meaning of my life is
So I'm not promoting this beverage, but I just thought it was a beautiful way to demonstrate what it can look like. And there's certainly different, maybe assumptions that you might have been making as you're watching this about, oh, I think I know the storyline, but just one person being supportive can have such a meaningful impact. There's so many little things that we can do to support, recognize, and honor someone. And I also like that it gave some examples of maybe heteronormativity when he was in the store, that scowl that he received when he was just buying something, and then, you know, when he's looking at that billboard, like waiting for a bus, he just that awkwardness, and just, you know, we shouldn't have to worry about those sorts of things, but it showed a lot, and so I like to bookend between the video that I have at the beginning, and hopefully this one is to demonstrate what it really can look like. So with that, that's all I have for the presentation. I'd love to answer questions. We have plenty of time. And certainly I'd like to be more contextual about how this relates to the work that you're doing. That certainly I didn't have a video to show what interactions may look like, but I wanted to talk about it and put it into real context. So I hope that we can do that now, if you're willing and able to stay. Okay. So what's the first, what do you share your pronouns with anybody at this point? Have you done that very frequently? I'm only sitting this far because I want to make sure that we can still hear the questions in the recording. But have you done that? Yeah. Have you tried it? Yes. Yeah, a few times. Cool.
So ultimate frisbee, has now word changes a lot right now. People say email matching. Email matching. And non-binary. I've noticed that shifting a lot.
So you're seeing it in sports. It was what was it? Ultimate frisbee. Is it inclusive sport? So hey, that's awesome. So yeah, so because of that, you're seeing pronouns being used more regularly, or folks have the opportunity. I don't think it should ever be a requirement, but just an invitation. I always say invitation. It always sounds invitation sounds nice, but you're actually asking. But yeah, but folks get to share that, so we don't make assumptions. And for non-binary folks, we need to be aware of a lot of assumptions that we're making and not recognizing and supporting non-binary folks and trans folks as well. So that creates an inclusive space. Awesome. Anybody else? Do you have them on your name tags or business cards? Yeah.
We encourage staff to send in our details. We have them on our applications.
Nice.
You like a first name as opposed to.
So you're using it in a lot of different spaces. So invitation to include it in emails. It sounds like as you're applying, getting to reference, getting to choose pronouns. So you're starting right out from the very beginning. And what was the other example? Applications. Yeah. Awesome.
7 shifts, scheduling, and
That's awesome. Thank you. Right.
Trying to figure out how to do that. Or and be able to have that out there and move it forward and how do that not necessarily brought back to the speed, but what has still included being stand up before it. I know there's cases where they might have said some people and not others. And so you never had that interaction yet, felt right there in the spot, still kind of like timid because you didn't realize that whole time for, yeah.
So let me ask you a couple questions. So so I can paraphrase for folks that are going to watch the video later. So there's hesitation maybe to include pronouns on an application out of fear of a bias.
Yeah.
So can I just start with that first? We should, in a perfect world, we would want to remove bias from the hiring process, period. My only concern is if you're solely concerned about the bias related to someone's gender identity or because of their pronouns. And I would also be raising awareness about bias around names, bias around age, bias around. So if you feel like you can't include your pronouns out of a bias, then maybe an invitation to explore. There are different types of platforms that can be used that will remove, or maybe through the process, maybe someone does put their pronouns in either the application process, or some folks are putting it on their, on their resumes and or cover sheets as well. but maybe there's a way to remove any candidate's name, and I would go to name, not just pronouns, but because you don't want to discriminate based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and all of the others, but there's unfortunately the bad news about bias is that we all have it. The good news is that we can do our best to recognize where that bias may be, but I just think by not including a candidate, I understand removing several characteristics so that you remove the element of bias, but to just take out pronouns that may inherently be making someone who is non-binary or trans, they may not feel welcomed or accepted just because you're not necessarily recognizing it. It's just something to think about. But there are platforms where you can just remove all of those personal characteristics, where they live, because there could be a bias based on what, if someone actually puts their physical address, there could be bias around, oh, they're in that part of town or whatever. And the name can certainly be biased, or age, as well as pronoun. But if you're just solely thinking about a bias associated with pronouns, there's a bigger opportunity, I guess, is all I bring up about that.
Like say, don't put it in the process for how later candidates doesn't get the job, it's more so after they're hired, what is the
Oh, so
kind of like bringing up like.
So it's not at the beginning stage of them applying, but where could that be later in the process if it is a strong candidate and or a new employee? There's inevitably additional paperwork that they'll sign and there's a lot. I just know in any organization, maybe that's the opportunity then, is maybe just, again, having name, they're going to have to fill out their name probably again anyway. And so maybe just getting, and it should never be a requirement. So not that someone has to share their pronouns, but it's an invitation to do it. Either you have a blank space. If someone asks, well, what do you mean by pronouns? It's like, oh, do you go by he, him, she, her, they, them, or other pronouns or combinations? If you would like to, we want to be respectful. And so that might be as good a time as any when they're doing either the HR stuff, signing for benefits and that sort of thing. And obviously on your benefits, look for trans inclusive options. That's another area that folks want to, feel recognized and supported, is looking at who's providing your healthcare and do they have gender affirming resources and support as well. That will go such a long way. But that might be a place where you do it, and then they can decide whether they want to share that or not. And then anybody, maybe just thinking about, in a setting where you're a restaurant or something, then I think, again, if you're addressing a group or table, you're not going to ask everyone seated there what their name and pronouns are, but at least as a server or someone engaging, interacting with, as a manager who comes in to a situation, just, hi, I'm Johnny Humphrey, I'm the manager, my pronouns are he and his, how can I help this situation or whatever? You're normalizing it. And so then as you're addressing, if you're addressing the group instead of guys or ladies or whatever, use non-gendered language. And then as you go back and you're talking to someone about someone at the table, don't use gender, strive not to use gender references about them. The person wearing so-and-so, whatever that might be, as a characteristic that you could easily describe instead of the woman or the man, or I don't know how they identify. I mean, that's, even when you do something like that, can be really offensive or stigmatizing. So find other ways to characterize that the person, I've heard human, we're all humans. So the human that's wearing or something is really, in this type of setting, in the office, just being respectful, again, starting with they, them, theirs is a safe place to start. And it's okay to ask, are you referring to one person or a group of people? Because they can be used in the singular. So we wouldn't say they is, we would say they are. But it's okay if you're just asking for clarification, you're not a bad person, by just saying, are we referring to a single individual, especially if you're not sure who they're referring to. So it's okay to ask for clarification about that too. What else?
I've noticed a lot of people say it's not gender bathroom, it's just they replace like a woman's bathroom with a man's bathroom or like other things. So funky ways of saying it, or like art, we just kind of confusing.
Sure.
Almost sometimes I feel like it's like removing that people. I don't know what your idea is.
So, yeah, so the question is around restrooms and signage and we're moving away from. So we're using more inclusive language, so it used to be, you know, non-gendered restrooms, which implies the absence of gender. And so we're more inclusive, it's just like all gender, so all gender restroom, all gender facility. And you might be seeing, it's interesting, there may be code requirements in this, at least in the city, county of Denver and some other places. If you have a restroom with single occupancy, by default, that has to be an all gender restroom. Some businesses are striving even further, and so they're saying all restrooms can be all gender. So what they're using, and what's helpful, if you do something like that, it never hurts to use representation for if there's a stall or if there's a urinal, or like one of my other clients did new signage and they just wanted to demonstrate how many urinals versus, so if it is all gender, you know, when you walk in, what to anticipate, what the accommodations might be. I think in one of the cities, they got a little bit of pushback, so do check with code, zoning requirements, what might limitations be, but all gender restrooms should ideally be accommodating, and they should be able, for people with disabilities should have access to that as well, and that they, think about it being in multiple languages, so translation and also in Braille. But I think it's helpful. Some people don't say, and they just use some representation, and that can be confusing if you're like, is that a cowboy? I've been to bars, Western bars, country bars, I'm like, or they're using, unusual references, and I have to spend a moment just to figure out, well, that's problematic. You should just be, you gotta go. And you have to spend 2 or 3 additional seconds trying to like, what does this represent? What does this mean? That may be cute and cheeky, but it's not necessarily overly accommodating for anybody if you have to spend a necessary amount of time. But to be inclusive, you should be able to have access to a restroom that aligns with your gender identity. However, when you only have 2 gender binary references, accommodations, and you're making it difficult for a non-binary person, it's not accommodating for a non-binary person. They have to decide in that moment, okay, where am I going to get the least amount of flack or trouble or issues with? There's a fear mongering about trans around safety and around appropriate versus inappropriate for trans people. There are 0 reported incidences of a transgender person being inappropriate, being disrespectful, being lewd, or any of those types of fear mongering things that we're hearing. There are hundreds of issues where transgender people get attacked, get harassed, get tormented in those spaces. So it's fear mongering to say that trans people are being lewd, inappropriate. So the safety factor is ultimately should be for trans people, their safety. And people shouldn't be policing or deciding you look masculine enough, you should be in here, you look feminine enough, because there's cis women that are being targeted as well because they don't look feminine enough, or men are not looking masculine enough. And so we should just let people do what they need to do. It's inappropriate, it's illegal to be lewd or doing inappropriate things in a bathroom, period. That's been a law for decades now. But to think suddenly that trans people are going to be doing something inappropriate is false. It's a false narrative, and it can be really harmful. So 2 check-ins. One, I just want to come back to your original question about policy and those types of things. Did that help? Did I answer? Or I think there's places in that process, and I understand the reluctancy. So I just wanted to come back to you real quick, and I want to come back to the restrooms too, but I didn't follow up. Pushing. Sure. Yeah. For sure. Yeah, and if they don't reference their pronouns, and don't start don't assign pronouns to that person. Just refer that person by their name, and they may say you can. Okay, I get it. Call, I go by he, him, or I go by she, her, or I go by they, them, their. Whatever pronouns they may use, they may not start out that way, but if you're always referring that person by name, then you'll be okay. I see now. So, and then they might share. But yeah, it's an invitation, not a requirement, not mandatory. Okay, bathrooms, restrooms, bathrooms. Any other thoughts or questions? I mean, it's a valid one to be asked, and there's a lot of questions, and so just in here, is there either family restroom, or is there one available either here or in others where someone who's non-binary would have access to a facility? So just thinking about that. What else? What are misconceptions that you may have? Oh, good, someone online.
My experience, microaggressions are such a big problem. Staff internally and from past would address. I was wondering if you could address microaggressions and at what level they need to be addressed, when they surface within staff and or with customers. Said I love the concept of microaggressions. I'm just wondering how I better relay staff to our staff.
So the question about microaggressions, how do we deal with microaggressions both from colleagues in the workplace as well as customers, patrons, and such? Microaggressions are usually things that we either aren't aware of that we're doing that really cause harm to one another. It's been considered death by 1,000 paper cuts. So it's just like paper cut by itself doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but when it's happening over and over and over again, it becomes a gashing wound. And so how to address microaggressions in the moment? Ideally, if you were, if you're frontline and so you're interacting with let's start with a customer and they're being disrespectful. Obviously, you are worthy and you should be respected. And so if someone, it says something offensive to you in passing, usually it's something in jest or passing, you have the right to correct that person. I think the most important thing is being aware that management has your back. So if you have enough efficacy and can correct the person if they're misgendering you or something, if you feel comfortable enough correcting them, I would also let your manager know of situation, good, bad, or indifferent. So even if it's a good situation, one, just being aware that something happened in case it does evolve into a bigger issue. Should have the right, if they're just being belligerent, if they've been drinking and just being really offensive, that you have the right, hopefully, to get them out. So hopefully having security or something that can step in, the manager, of course, and explaining what the situation is. If you have an incident report, I think it's ideal to capture that in there as well, because they're going to be, your report will probably stand much better if they decide to have legal ramifications or sue, whatever. It's going to be their word versus a document that you've actually captured the information. But microaggressions are real and they're sneaky. And so, if you ideally are able to address it in the moment or have someone else support you in that situation, it depends. It doesn't matter what the microaggression is, if it's about your appearance, if it's about your identity, if it's about whatever, you shouldn't have to deal with that, I hope. And so, I hope that your management would have your back and support, but do as best you can to clearly articulate what the issue is that's occurring. And the sooner you can address it, the better, because by just kind of letting it slide, then that might give the impression that it's not a big deal. And obviously it most certainly should, would be, if you're experiencing it. And I think that in the validation that you would see is a manager just being right there to support you and saying, I've got your back. This, eject the patrons from, do whatever you can to ensure not only in that moment, but in the future that they're banned from coming, if that seems to be the most appropriate thing, or at least letting them know that you don't, that their behavior is not tolerated here or wherever you might be, I think would be helpful. And if there are other ideas, or what are you doing now in those types of situations that we might be able to talk through, give it more relevancy. Or maybe the individual that had a question, are there approaches that have been helpful or successful for them, and or what would they have wished occurred if they were in this circumstance, if they feel comfortable enough sharing? or other ideas? Do you all have ideas? Or suggestions for that type of situation? I guess it depends on what the circumstances are specifically and what those microaggressions look like. A lot of times we just discount a microaggression and kind of let it slide, and we shouldn't have to. The point being, either someone just is unaware of what they're saying or doing is offensive or, you know, disrespectful, and ideally you might enlighten them, or, you know, go to a manager and maybe have them intervene as well. What else? And then we'll check back in with that individual if I didn't answer the question or if there's additional context. Well, thank you all so very much for participating. I'll hang out for a few more moments if you'd like to visit. And then my contact information is certainly both on the workbook, but then if there's any follow-up or any questions, I'll be sharing the video. It should download today, and so then I can get that back to you so that you can share it with your folks as well. And then the workbook, of course, I hope is helpful. There's a digital version of it, so you can click through. There's a couple references. I do regional as well as national, and so I invite you to check those out. There's wonderful organizations around the state, and then the national organizations are really helpful as well. So I hope that will be beneficial. But thank you all so much for your time. I appreciate it.